Cool. So I want to kick this off with a little framing, and this shouldn't take longer than 5 minutes at best, maybe even 3. If I can share the screen, I have some visual aid to do the kickoff.
Mm-hmm.
Giving it 1 second.
Do I need to do something?
Yeah, oh yeah, you need to give me the ability to share screen. I think the easiest is if you just give me host, and there's some option to do it without that, but
okay, done.
Awesome. All right. So all right. So if you look at the history of innovation, ideas, and technology, it almost always follows a somewhat predictable pattern. Everything starts in complete uncertainty, experimentation, failure, learning, change, adaptation, until finally, eureka, a breakthrough happens. And then things start rolling. At this moment, evolution is almost unstoppable, and a pattern as old as times itself take place. At the end of this evolution, we see products and systems that can be described as commodity, predictable, standardized. Failure is unacceptable, reliable, it's ubiquitous, and everyone uses it without even being aware of it. And then once it reaches this point, new innovation will be built upon it, restarting the cycle again, until infinity. Who knows? So we can map ourselves and orient ourselves where we are right now. So right now there are no network states, and we are not sure how to build them. We might have ideas, but they are just that. But by taking those ideas and turning them into hypotheses and validating them, we will advance. So while sorry, I have to move something because this is written. Okay, there we go. So while I cannot claim what is needed, I surely have ideas. And I'm sure most of you have too. The reason why I'm presenting this is that I want to create a frame for this meetup and map out a possible path ahead. Because if we are persistent, we will create something previously undiscovered and unavailable that wasn't there before. And if we play our cards right, this design space will give rise to a better world than it was before we started. And with this, I want to kick off the meeting. Today, we're going to talk about technology and building blocks and infrastructure for network states. We have 2 speakers today. And yeah, Daniel, who do you think should start first?
Actually, I think Gareth and Daniel should start first presenting ColivingDAO, because I think later we have more questions for Niklas. So yeah, just to explain why a ColivingDAO is so important, there are now, Niklas just published a map in regards to the current state of the network state movement, and I saw like 5 projects who want to be a ColivingDAO basically in this direction, and it's really needed because we need physical outlets, so cloud first, territory last. And yeah, David and Daniel and Gareth, it's your stage. Tell your story and tell how you want to turn this into reality in simple English, you know. So
awesome. We will. Can we get the share screen right? Cool. We'll put up a little simple presentation, which is an adapted version of the one that we pitched to Shark Tank Malta. So give me 1 sec and we'll put that up. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Perfect. We'll go into slideshow mode. All right. So yeah, folks, I'm Gareth, this is Daniel. We're ColivingDAO. And the tagline is own where you rent from day one and have a real voice to shape your community. So we met and became friends in the UK's largest co-living, which started in 2016. We met in 2018. And co-living, I think everyone's familiar here, but it's a new way of living where residents get their own room or apartment and then access to shared facilities. Often very convenient, and the rent covers all bills in one. And it's a great way when you're moving to a big city like London to meet like-minded people and create long-lasting bonds. The downside, obviously, is that after a few years of living there, we both lived there for a few years each, we owned nothing and we paid rent every single month. And the co-living operator, the landlord, really pursued their own agenda and causing a lot of dissatisfaction in the community. And we can tell you 100 stories about all the weird things that happened with mismanagement and strange management decisions to really fracture and prevent the community from becoming a really valuable place where people love to live. So we always had fun chats about, you know, there must be a better way to do this. And actually, both of us were working in two different technology or innovation areas. I was working in governance innovation. Daniel was working in finance, DeFi, crypto innovation. And when we got chatting, we realized that the solution might be actually a hybrid of both of them. So that was a pretty exciting moment.
Yeah, so the reason this is coming about is, first of all, we noticed there's a global housing supply crisis, and the price is just going up a lot. And a lot of people are no longer able to be homeowners. At the same time, we see that there are these aspirations of individualistic living right now in the world, and it's destroying communities, it's destroying the ecosystems as well. It's a problem for the people, it's a problem for the environment. And I do see many system changers that are trying to find new ways to arrange community living, but it's not very easy to scale the models. I see models here and there, but no one has found really a way to scale the creation of communities. So we need a better way to have property ownership and a better way to organize regenerative community living. Now, the main problem for regenerative co-living communities is, first of all, the traditional ownership and governance systems don't give any voice to the residents. So there is dissatisfaction amongst people. There is a there is a lack of belonging as well in that sense. Also, yeah, the systems that people have used, some systems work better than others, but no one has come up with something that can scale very well. For operators, it's also a problem. The current existing rental, purely on a rental basis co-living model is a problem because there's no ownership, and the resident turnover is very high, and the maintenance can be very costly. Sales, marketing can be very costly. So our solution is a software platform for regenerative communities and for co-living operators that enables residents to effectively receive shares with each monthly payments. These shares also give them a voice to shape their community. So they're getting ownership and they're getting governance. The decision to use blockchain is because these shares need to be very easy to transact with. So buy, sell, issue. That's why we use a Web3 blockchain. And the benefits are very obvious. First of all, communities can have a blueprint that is turnkey, ready to go. Whenever a group of people or even one leader wants to create a community, they have a blueprint that they can use, which has a multi-stakeholder wealth and governance sharing. Traditional co-living operators will reduce turnover costs, marketing costs, sales costs, maintenance, and increase the revenue. And co-living residents, they own the place they live from day one, and they have a true voice in shaping their community.
So the blueprint that's ready to go is unique out there because it's a scalable blueprint. So it's not just applying to one, like there's loads of people trying to make eco villages and, you know, the future of living, regenerative housing, living out in the countryside or in cities and doing it a different way. And those models quite often are amazing and innovative, but they're not scalable. So ColivingDAO is a scalable blueprint for multiple co-livings or regenerative communities, depending on how you describe it. And this works with ColivingDAO as an enabler company, which creates and holds the ColivingDAO software on Web3. And then each co-living community or regenerative community plugs in to the ColivingDAO enabler company. Each of those communities is its own autonomous company as well. But we use a unique legal incorporation that enables each co-living company to be its own company, but to transact and own shares in the ColivingDAO enabler company and vice versa. So there's very strong links across them. And a bit more on how the residents get a real voice. Obviously, they're going to be shareholders, and so they can vote as shareholders, but it goes way beyond that. We're using a DAO because a DAO is a way of organizing the co-living community to enable residents to vote and coordinate their decisions easily. And not just on votes that rise all the way up to, I'm a shareholder, I need to vote. That would be pretty high level voting. But you can also vote at much lower decision levels within a DAO to organize a community like, hey, guys, what do we want on Saturday afternoon? Do we want yoga or do we want a comedian to come in? That doesn't need to be a shareholder vote, right? It can go down to a lower decision-making protocol layer. It doesn't even need to be on the DAO necessarily, but the DAO would enable it to go to a resident's vote or a multi-stakeholder vote if it was needed. So the key difference here is that a decentralized community requires a decentralized multi-stakeholder company and corporation. You need both. You need to make sure residents have legally protected voting rights and voting power, and the company and corporation must be compatible with a DAO. We've seen that in the crypto world in particular is a decentralized world kind of in name, but often the companies that control crypto are actually centralized entities and they have a centralized point of failure. This is a way to remove a centralized point of failure to make this a truly scalable decentralized solution. We use a fair shares commons company structure, which is a legal incorporation built on 150 years of cooperative wisdom. It is basically a co-op, but it's been enhanced by some leading thinkers, a guy from Sheffield University, Professor Rory Ridley Duff, and Graham Boyd, who is a kind of visionary pioneer who is looking, how do we build the paradigm shift to a regenerative society type of thinking. So they came together and they enhanced the co-op. So this is a recognized legal entity built on cooperative law. The key benefit here is that it's not only investors that benefit, all primary stakeholders benefit in the wealth that's generated, and they have a voice. For me, my motivation here is really on the environmental side as well as the people side. And when you have multi-stakeholder power that's truly decentralized, you can share decision-making and wealth sharing and legally embed incentives to regenerate the well-being of people, natural ecosystems, and make money at the same time.
Yeah, the co-living industry is growing. Of course, you all know that very well. So since 2015, it's been growing exponentially. The CAGR for co-living is estimated from, on the low end, let's say 11%, on the high end, even all the way up to 30%. And there's in the UK alone, for example, they estimate 725,000 people in the core target market, and that's purely on the rental basis. So it's going to be even higher once we add the ownership basis as well. So definitely the industry is where capital is flowing as well in terms of investment too. And what we're building is it's a platform, effectively it's a SaaS platform, so it's going to be software, and we have multiple features that allow successful management of the co-living space for residents, for the managers, for investors, and for partners. So they all have their own user account that they can all use the platform to do things such as, for example, buying and selling shares, paying securely, receiving rental yield automatically, receiving dividends automatically, getting rent reduction through token locking, getting discounts for token locking, and so on. So the shared governance can happen on the platform as well. We have a mock-ups of what the platform can look like, and effectively we need about 42 weeks from the moment we start the development. We build the software architecture already. What we need is to build the actual code. So from the moment we start the development, we estimate about 42 weeks to be ready to go.
So I guess, guys, Daniel, go. We can continue. We've got other detail here, but I mean, we've given you the basic flavor So we can stop there and go into a Q&A if that makes sense, or we can keep going. Up to you.
No, I think Q&A makes sense. No, Severin, because I think we are all experts here. We understood what you're trying to do. So now it's time to take it apart and discuss it. I can only share my story. I was born in East Germany, and my father is still the head of the biggest housing cooperative in Germany. They have 30,000 apartments, and they managed to take this idealistic socialist idea of co-owned property and transferred it over into a capitalist market. And this is existing now since 32 years. They are the cheapest, they are the best, and you own a share of this cooperative. So it's definitely possible. It's working since 30 years. And I think we can roll it out to the whole world, using a DAO. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
We're open the floor to any questions or interesting points of discussion.
So would I be right in saying that the laws of countries for the most part don't actually recognize DAOs in any particular way, and that what's happening is that you've got this company that the law recognizes, and the law of any country of the countries recognize that the company owns the land and the houses, and then somehow in the articles of incorporation in the company, like through the way you write the contract, somehow that gives the DAO legal force through some kind of binding contract that you write. Is that how it roughly works? Or
that's exactly how it works. Yeah. So you cannot register a DAO as a company except in Wyoming in the US, as far as I'm aware today. And when you so if the problem of registering a DAO as a private limited company is you have a centralized point of failure in a DAO, and it negates the power of the DAO.
yeah, sort of. I guess the technical mechanism for writing the articles of incorporation that transfer that give the DAO kind of power through some kind of contract in when the articles of incorporation of a company are quite complicated to actually explain in full.
Yeah, that's why we're leaning on the brains of others who created the Fair Shares Commons, which is a ready to go decentralized structure. With 10 years of thinking behind it. So it's kind of plug and play. What we need to do though is we need to customize the DAO to fit with the legal incorporation structure to make sure that the two are completely interconnected, which is why it needs to be a custom software build. That's one of the primary reasons. But yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly right.
And so the shares will then be tradable on chain and represent ownership. Like so I have a share, so it's basically real estate backed shares tradable on chain.
Yes, exactly. So they're not directly real estate shares, they're company shares, and the company owns the real estate. There is a little bit of room to play with this because we'll have to comply with the local regulations regarding property. So it might slightly differ in each country, but the standard idea, so whenever it's allowed to do so, the shares are the company shares. And because the share owns the property, people have exposure to the value of the property, but it's not only that, they actually have exposure to the entire co-living business as well. So effectively, we're talking about tokens that are securities, so they are tokenized securities. So we also bypass all the issues that we have nowadays with Web3 tokens being deemed securities out of the blue and causing risks, because effectively we're designing the whole system where the shares are, the tokens are already securities.
Yeah, we're going to basically say that these tokens are securities up front.
I don't understand how that works, because like my understanding of like issuing shares and all that is there's all this like paperwork and directors meetings and stuff like that in order to like issue legal shares to people. So I don't understand how that can be like simplified in the eyes of the law in the form of like doing tokens on chain. So the DAO people obviously can write a DAO where tokens be traded on chain very easily, but how do you transfer that into people actually owning shares in the company that is kind of legally recognized in the nation as owning the property?
Yeah, so there are countries where it's possible to pretty much instantly issue shares that are tokenized. It's not possible in every country at the moment. So part of the work we're doing is to find a legal framework where it can be done pretty much everywhere, or at least in most countries. Gradually will expand to more and more countries. So in certain countries, you can do it already. In other countries, we might have to go through different countries and maybe register part of the entity, let's say one entity in one country, one entity in another country, and find the actual structure. Ultimately, we hope to be able to do it everywhere, but surely we'll be starting from the places where it's possible. And the direction of the world is taking as well as things are going to get simplified. Many countries that didn't allow simple shares issuance in the past, they do allow it now. So we also want to see a change, but we can't wait for it. That's why we're creating all this infrastructure, which will make it possible in as many countries as possible.
I'd be really interested if you could, if you had a PowerPoint slide, if you want to give any future presentations about it. One thing that I'd be interested in would be to see a slide with all the countries where it's where issuing kind of shares automatically is legal, because that sounds like it's really it's really kind of fundamental to making these DAO things work smoothly.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think. Sorry, I think I'm going to interject here so we can move on to the next talk, and then we have a little bit of discussion once we had everything, okay?
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, then without further ado, Niklas, you have the rights to share screen and everything. You're ready to go?
Sure. For what time should I aim? Similar, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes talk and then discussion?
I think 10 minutes is perfect. Then we have enough time for questions.
Okay, can't share a screen yet.
You should be able now.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, so I haven't prepared for making this 10 minutes. It was for a bit longer presentation, but I'll try to sort of make it concise. Right, so I'm aimed in this talk to bring together the concept of network states and startup cities and show how it can accelerate technological progress in the real world. So I realize that's, a bit of a take that not everyone agrees with. Sort of what's the interpretation of Balaji's book, right? So network state highly relied on the community and so on and so forth. So there seems to be a bit of a confusion sometimes. So some people think it's kind of a Discord server on steroids or something like that, where you stay online for a while. But my take is really, no, we're building new cities, right? And there's a large movement that is very much connected to that idea. That includes Balaji himself, right? So he's talking about cities. He's concretely mentioning crowdfunding territories and communities and, quoting examples like Prospera or cul-de-sac that are doing exactly that, right? So I discussed this with Patrick Friedman. I'm not going to go into that, but they're working together, right? So Balaji is an advisor with him, and he pretty much agreed with me that the network state is kind of a strategy innovation that sort of connects with the charter cities and the seasteading space, right? So I'm not going to play that. But sort of based on that, I created that new cities industry landscape. So in my interpretation, startup cities are kind of one endpoint, right? Sort of to bring governance innovation to sort of enforce governance in the real world, right? So the online layer, network states, is just a strategy for how to get started, right? So, and sort of co-living is living sort of in between, right? Or it's kind of a bit of a network states light strategy. So co-living is using existing legal guardrails to realize a certain moral innovation. So I kind of want to distinguish it a bit from network states like Afropolitan Praxis that have the expressed goal of building a real city, where co-living, that's typically not the case, even though these projects can also be very ambitious and want to fundamentally rethink the way we live. And there's a couple of layers of infrastructure that are built to support that ecosystem, and a couple of foundations and institutes that are promoting that idea. I think the two clearest example of these two strategies, sort of the network state approach, Afropolitan Praxis, is one, sort of start online with an aligned community and then kind of have a strategy to develop your own service economy online, your own cryptocurrency. And, both Praxis and Afropolitan are already negotiating with existing jurisdictions and governments to get the space where to build cities or effort towns in the real world. So that's just a point that comes a bit later in their journey. And Prospera is kind of the 0 to 1 in the space. I live there myself, right? So it has the full stack of like governance services and land and real estate and laws and regulations. And so it's already possible to move into a place that has a lot of governance innovation. To tie it kind of together a bit, so I think governance innovation is really the big goal of this. So if governance was an industry, it would be 30% of world GDP. I'm going to rush a bit through this, but it's kind of the key, a goal vector of this whole space is to change governance, to really upgrade humanity, right? So to create the conditions for better economics, for better development. There's something that I call a full stack, right? So that's kind of the end state, right? So you have laws and regulations, governance services, land and real estate. That's kind of the components of a country, if you will, right? So if you have all these three, you could call yourself a startup city in my terminology, like Prospera. And the innovation that Balaji is bringing into the space is he wants to reduce the barriers to entry for new startups, right? So places like Prospera and Kwashi or Sida Morazan, they're more expensive to start, right? So Sida Morazan is started by a industrialist, right? So he has the capital to easily invest 12 million in the first iteration. Prospera itself has raised more than 150 million in funding, right? And Kwashi required deep connections into the Zambian government, right? As do most of these models here. So they're very hard to start, even though they're much easier to start than what was previously city building that cost hundreds of millions. But then the network state model is basically saying, hey, if you don't yet have these connections and deep pockets, you can start earlier. You can start with an online community and then develop the full stack later. So I think in many ways that has its advantages. But if you already have the kinds of connections to start with the jurisdiction, that also has its advantages, right? So there's pros and cons to each strategy. And I'm totally agnostic to which strategy is working out better. What's definitely true is that these charter cities are more advanced, right? So these Effortporten in Praxis, they're more new startups on the starting line, right? So I have a bit of a taxonomy, how to see these, how to view these network states / startup cities, and what's kind of important to understand about them or the direction which they go, right? So they could be a bit more like Disney World, where you have like 100% curated product and like kind of like a planned economy, if you will. They could be a bit more like, or they could be more like Burning Man, like Blackheart City, which is a 100% emergent economy that's zero planned, right? So in that terminology, places like Nkwashi or Morazan are a bit more planned, right? So, and Prospera has a bit more, has much more free market, right? So they don't have a master plan that's like similar to zoning. They actually have it more as a guidance for developers to come in and co-create, right? So, but Prospera is a very free market oriented model. The second one is the degree of autonomy that you have. So you can be a government-led zone. So it means you have zero independence, or you can be your own country. And there's multiple degrees in between. You can have special economic zones or free zones. So Panama has a lot, Costa Rica or Uruguay are examples with different degrees of legal autonomy. And Honduras has the best framework in the world to have a very high degree of legal autonomy. It can also differ in terms of what you want to optimize for. So I think in the middle is sort of this globalized and regulated existing jurisdictions. So for some people, they're aiming to more self-sustenance, more ruralism, more escapism and self-sufficiency. So Aleph Citadel is a great example. They're in Argentina and like total Bitcoin maxis, don't know crypto scams and whatever, and kind of, living on the countryside, sort of where the government can't reach us and stuff like that. Whereas Afropolitan or Prosper are kind of more hyper-integrated network state / startup cities that want to create something like a Dubai or Hong Kong that's fundamentally sort of integrated with the world economy. And I would argue that someone like Afropolitan would push it even further with doing things like citizen passes and creating their own embassies that would sort of allow people from anywhere in the world to be part of this sort of network state, right? So I do agree that, Prospera doesn't have all the components or pushing the boundaries as much yet as we could or we want to see in the space, but it's definitely a vector that's trending in that direction. So, I wouldn't disagree, hey, maybe we don't yet have an actual network state, but we could call it network state startups, right? So this brings us back to this landscape. And I'm happy to discuss this, what you like about it or don't like. Just caveats, I'm excluding innovative jurisdictions. These are like corporate innovation to me. So they're not doing enough, even though they can sometimes realize breakthrough innovations like Estonia did. And there's also private cities. So these are also kind of existing players and not really new startups. So I have a bit of a bias because I'm a VC. So I look at this like an emerging startup industry and not like as kind of a, hey, this is like a clean categorization of everything. Yeah, with that said, technological progress. So why do I think these places could accelerate technological progress? So I really like Balaji's quote: bits reopen innovation in atoms. Innovation in areas like biomedicine, robotics, and energy is not upstream of the network state, it's downstream of it. So I really think these places can sort of end a stagnation we see in many areas and lead to superabundance. So just a thought experiment is, if we had 2% productive economic growth, then our world GDP would increase by 7.5 times in 100 years. We don't have 2% productive economic growth right now. I think we're on a declining trajectory when it comes to that. We're at best at 1.5, maybe even lower, right? So I think the way these statistics sometimes are done is also not correct. But assuming we are at 2%, that's what we lead up to. If we increase that to 5%, we could 130x the whole world GDP, and that would really be superabundance. That would sort of advance humanity to a whole new level that we can't even think about yet how that would look like. And I think the levers to reach that are doable, right? So again, I'm in VC, I'm looking at different industries and startups and how they could disrupt this. So I'm just thinking through how could changing the base layers, the regulatory structure for these industries, sort of lead to this additional growth. And I think it's well possible, right? So a mixture of health, housing, energy, transport, finance, and education could lead to a 1 to 2% plus in the growth rate. And I think the biggest innovation would be open borders, and sort of to a full degree or to a lesser degree, but definitely something in that direction, because the labor market is sort of the biggest in the world. So I'm not going to talk too much about it, but in healthcare, we have something like Eroom's law. So the rate of innovation and new drug development is basically the reverse of Moore's law, right? So where Moore's law increased computing power every 2 years, the opposite is happening in drug development, right? So that's a failure of the regulatory state. Same in housing. So if we had the same housing policies as Tokyo, we could save 75% on housing in like New York and London, in San Francisco and all that. Same in energy. So if we'd got nuclear power, we would be on an escape velocity when it comes to all sorts of other technologies like nanorobots and things like that. So energy is really the area that a lot of other areas depend on. So if we can get energy accelerated innovation back, that would enable a lot of other areas. And transport is also an area that has been stagnating a lot. So airline speeds, for example, haven't increased in more than 50 years. And the reason is just one regulation by the FAA in the United States that says, well, airline speed is regulated and not noise, right? So it's completely artificial. In finance, it's a bigger topic. It's hard for me to estimate, but I think separating state and money would be a good idea. It could be a massive multiplier and reducing inflation at the risk of default and financial collapse. Education is also very hard to estimate, but the positive impact could be ranging from saving tons of money that's wasted right now. So if we're massively increasing spending on education without having any impact, to like escape velocity and scientific progress, right? So centralized science funding is a very bad idea. So the rate of disruptive science that is really transformative is going down. So doing it that better could have escape velocity potential. And last but not least, open borders. So economists estimate that if we had a completely free labor market where someone from Haiti owning like $500 in Haiti could sort of 20x their income by going to a place like the United States. So just having a more flexible global labor market would be by far the biggest innovation. And I think it's also where these zones can help. I'm not going to go through that, but you could have something like for-profit refugee cities. So there's already an alliance called the SDZ Alliance that's thinking about that model and where you could implement it in Africa. So having the physical space with new governance, hey, we do it for profit. Anyone is welcome that is able and willing to contribute. That would be a major innovation, similar in sort of power for economic development like Shenzhen in China, right? So, and the way to unlock all this is having a better regulatory system or structure. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go too deep into that, but I think Balaji is very well aware and talking about these regulatory innovations that are needed. I think what is the winning candidate for better regulations that would allow all these other industries to thrive is Tom W. Bell's ULEX, which is polycentric law. So it's something that requires a bit of context we're talking about, but you can find an episode on my podcast. Sort of that polycentric law coupled with a competitive insurance market for risk assessment, in my mind, is I think the winning candidate, which is why I'm so excited about Prospera and about sort of realizing much real world innovation there. So there's already a couple of companies in Prospera that do gene therapy, drone logistics, robotic construction, and basically, getting a banking license without the lender of last resort model, right? So that's a massive regulatory innovation. Yeah, so generally there's 3 industries that I think have the most to gain right now, right? So it's not something in the future, you can already do it, right? So there's already a couple of places where you can do clinical trials, where you can do drones, hopefully small scale nuclear at some point, even though that's a PR challenge mostly. And there's also tons of jurisdictions that are crypto friendly, where we can do things like security token sales much more easily. One industry that I'm particularly passionate about is insurance. So I think there is a massive low-hanging fruit that is not realized through bad regulations when it comes to insurance, right? Right now, if you're doing a startup in any of these places, you can find like a physical sandbox to do some of these things in the real world that you can't do, or just very hard to do anywhere else because of like permitting and stuff like that. There's the whole legal innovation side when it comes to jurisdictional wrappers. So there's a couple of other jurisdictions besides Wyoming, for example, the Catawba Digital Economic Zone, or the Marshall Islands, or, well, Prospera, where you have legally recognized rights as a DAO, right? And that is kind of a legal innovation and template that can scale to other jurisdictions. In drones, for example, we are negotiating right now with Colombia and Brazil to do the same regulation that we did in Prospera, because we have a company that's already doing that there. And last but not least, you have early adopter communities in some of these cities, right, that want this kind of tech, right? So we're talking about, for example, 3D property rights in the air, right? So you can much more easily create a market where it would be easier for drone startups to scale, for example. Medical tourism can be a big industry, and you have like communities that are very tech forward and want these things to happen. Yeah, so in my own interest, I have a podcast where I talk a lot about that with some thought leaders in the industry and some of these entrepreneurs. And I have a VC that is a microfund. I made the first 7 investments, and I'm planning, because it was very successful so far, to do a bigger fund too, potentially 1 crypto fund and 1 traditional equity fund to kind of supercharge this movement. And I also do events. 2 of them are in Prospera. The other one is in the Network State Experiment by Vitalik Buterin in Montenegro, which is where I am right now. So feel free to join for any of the events and see it yourself. Was that 10 minutes?
Almost, but great presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Niklas.
I'm really
Sure.
impressed, Niklas. Honestly, I never saw someone who has such a clear, rational view on the movement. So I'm really impressed.
Thanks.
How much does it cost to live in Prospera? How much does a house cost in Prospera? Is it like Monte Carlo? Or is it massively cheaper? But like how much for?
It's not Monte Carlo, but it's also not super cheap, which is actually a bit of a bottleneck for some things, right? So we're gonna build, or they're building like a big tower right now that's reducing real estate costs, right? So you're gonna be able to rent for like $500 a month in one of the Duna apartments, most likely. But the way it is right now, Roatan is a popular tourist destination. So during season, the first half of the year, it's quite expensive, like not New York level, but you'd easily pay like $2,000 a month to get okay enough housing. right? The second half of the year is a bit cheaper. So with a bit of savvy, you can find cheaper rentals for like 1,000, 1,500 per month in the islands. Costs of living are okay, not sort of developed country level like United States or whatever, but also not Mexico level, not super cheap. But you have good supermarkets, grocery stores, and all that. So that's very livable, but we aim to reduce the cost much further. One big bottleneck is the cost of travel, right? So it's actually easiest to go to Prospera from the United States. So from places like Miami and Dallas and Houston, you have direct flights that have decent costs. But from Latin America, for example, or Europe, the flights are often very long, right? And very expensive because Latin America has all these like airport taxes and stuff like that. So that's actually very unfortunate because I'd love to attract more entrepreneurs from Latin America to come. But the way it stands right now, it's comparable to a Berlin, I'd say, in terms of the costs, if you're able to use a bit of savvy on the ground instead of going to like expensive tourist-oriented places.
Is the housing market extremely illiquid? Because I presume it's quite small, or are there actually lots of houses on the market? Like, how much would it cost to actually buy a house or buy an apartment?
Yeah. I mean, Roatan is an island, right? So Prospera is just a small part of that community, right? So the whole island has the size of Hong Kong and about 70,000 people living on it. And Prospera has about the size of Monaco. It has about like 50 to 100 people living there. With the new real estate development, it could go up to 200, 300 by the end of the year. I'm going to move there together with my wife. So within Prospera, of course, it's a small market, but right now there's very good options. So I'm buying a Duna apartment, and that's on the lower cost side, right? So you can get an apartment starting at 100,000 or maybe even 90,000, right? And that's just kind of a studio. One bedroom is right now at 130,000. Which is very cool. That's what my wife and I are getting. It has like a pool or co-working space and a gym. So I think that's a very affordable and great option. And there are several still available. There's also higher end options, right? So Pristine Heights and Bayabu, which will be like very high grades kind of buildings. And then outside on the rest of Roatan, there is, lower cost and higher cost options.
I offer an observation. Thanks for a super interesting talk, Niklas. Amazing. Really paints a picture of the bigger picture. An observation on the 2% economic growth causing a 7x uplift in the global economy. The way that the kind of leading thinkers are describing today's economy is it's a degenerative economy. It's causing a lot of environmental externalities and social externalities. If you 7x the current economic system, you end up with 7x the externalities. It just wouldn't work, right? So one of the most important things about the network state is it enables an innovation in governance, and an innovation in governance and wealth and decision-making power enables us to build a clean energy, circular materials economy. It completely paradigm shifts the way that society operates. And so you can 7x or bigger the global economy without hitting up against the ecological, we're hitting ecological constraints right now in the next 20, 30 years. We've already breached a few of them, but the paradigm shift that's required to get there is enormous, which is why I'm so excited about this work and so pleased to connect with Daniel Go and everyone else here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my opinion on this is I think the best goal is abundance, right? So once you have abundance, you're much in a better position to the present places that are more hospitable to human life, right? So there's an inherent trade-off. If you reduce like energy usage, if you reduce industrialization and sort of your path to increasing wealth, then you're also less resilient against some of these environmental impacts or sort of things that can happen to you, right? So I think the right goal is to increase our use of energy, increase our level of wealth and abundance while making it cleaner, right? So I think people are not talking enough or are too risk averse to go into really interesting areas in innovation when it comes to energy, making it cleaner, like nuclear. I think nuclear would allow us to have a much cleaner and more powerful energy system. Same with geoengineering. So I talked to like someone who does cloud engineering and cloud seeding, which is controversial, but it could directly allow us to mirror back the sun that is trapped by greenhouse gases through like sulfur particles that we send into the air. So I think by sort of becoming more abundant societies, we increase the potential to also do regeneration, right?
Really nice. Thank you for all this information.
Any other questions? I saw a lot of questions I saw a lot of posts in the chat.
Yeah, there was a question, I think, from Freedom Friend, who wrote a question. I can read it out. In the EU, everyone could see what happens to digital freedoms, chat protocols, the Pirate Bay lockdown, Vorratsdatenspeicherung, laws against crypto. How can we have digital states if the jurisdictions basically hate us? In his opinion, we first need a physical space, and then we set up DAOs and servers and computer. And yeah, I guess that's the question.
I mean, there are a couple of places, right? I mean, in Prospera, you can have full tax residency, not citizenship. But, I think Palau is doing citizenship as well. So there's just a stack of options that are being built right now. And I think the smart strategy for you personally would be to diversify, right? I mean, there are some jurisdictions, in existing in the EU that are friendly and that are nice and where it's good to spend time. And you can diversify and get like citizenship and get residency and have your tax, have your business, have a bank in other jurisdictions.
I mean, I can also add my 2 cents here. Just speaking about Malta, why it doesn't make sense to go physical first. I introduced this nomad visa here in Malta, and if you want to pull this off, of course, you have some enemies who also want to be the people in charge, and you just make yourself attackable, especially in the beginning. If they want to shut you down, they will shut you down. They will send people maybe to your co-living, and they find reasons to shut it down. So I think it's more important to grow to a certain size until you are too big to be shut down, If there are now 1,000 nomads in Malta and they would suddenly say, we raise the income tax from 0%, in Malta you pay 0% income tax, to 20, there would be a huge shitstorm and we would just leave and never come back to Malta. Malta is a burned country, so they will not do it. So that's why I think going digital first makes sense. At one point, of course, I want to own a huge castle here. Not own, but like live there. But not now. This would be stupid. They would just attack me. And there is no, if someone wants to succeed in court, they will succeed.
I would say there's pros and cons to each strategy, and it really depends on what you already have available, right? So if you already have a lot of social capital, if you have like a big name, they're able to raise big funds, why not get like 2 jurisdictions at the same time, right? Or 3, then you're also less attackable, right? So, and build the online community on top, right? I think it's a matter of where you are right now in the stack, right? So, and, at some point, even if you're a network state, you also need to go to physical jurisdictions. And then you have the same problems that one that starts as a physical jurisdiction have, right? So one advantage of the physical one is that you do the hardest part first. So you're kind of front loading your risk. The disadvantage is, of course, that you're attackable and that you have higher upfront costs, right? So as a network state, you're kind of more resilient. You might have more shots on goal, by having sort of extended or large leverage. So I think there's something to be said for both strategies. And I really think it depends on where you add the resources that you can mobilize right now or when your strengths are, right? So Prospera is extremely strong at sort of the building government partnerships, legitimacy kind of thing. They have very credible and well-connected entrepreneurs and access to large capital pools, right? And they're also getting a second jurisdiction and potentially more because we're right now building the network like of aligned governments that are open to giving these kinds of freedoms, right? So I think that's massively opening up because it creates benefits for governments too, right? So governments also want like foreign direct investment. There's a history of hundreds of thousands, special economic zones all over the world. So, there's governments who say, hey, we give you like acquired rights and we're not going to touch you. We give you like a 50-year stability guarantee, even places like Honduras. So that's totally fine. But it means Prospera's weakness is a bit more on the community building side, right? So that's like the strength of places like Astropolitan. So they don't yet have sort of the access to the governments that would allow them this kind of status and build this kind of credibility. But they are extremely good at community building, right? So they have like the African diaspora of like 200,000 people, right? So that's just a lot, and that's what's really cool. But even then, you know, building leverage is easier said than done, right? Because when you're fully online, you need to create kind of skin in the game, right? It's easy to get to a number of like 200,000 or 300,000 when it comes to organizing like events. So everyone is like, yeah, cool, whatever. But when it comes to actually putting skin in the game and do like a Shackleton journey where you go to a risky jurisdiction and completely change your life, that's a different thing. Like even Afropolitan, you know, is not just because the number is large really able to do that right away. So I think it's just a matter of where you start and where resources you have at your disposal. But both have a very valuable strategy, and I'm a massive fan of Balaji, that he's just has created this tremendous innovation in the space. Because, you know, if the costs to start are in the tens of millions, we just have few entrepreneurs who are going to the starting line. And with Balaji as the network state, we can have many more.
And at the very least, what Balaji is doing, even if the network state, I mean, at the very least, what he's doing is he's building a market for these startup cities. That, you know, as people accumulate together and form these communities, people, you know, the people who are doing the startup cities, like, hey, actually, there are all these people who want to go out and form a physical space somewhere. So that's kind of proof of demand. Also, when you talk about starting in 2 jurisdictions, I guess that's one of the strengths of seasteading, is that you could have several host nations that rent their water out, and then you could move your boat into one of those jurisdictions. And if you have the ability to go to either jurisdiction, if some of the jurisdictions renege, then you can sort of keep your house on the water. Whereas if it's on land, then even if you do it with several jurisdictions, you can go to another jurisdiction, but you kind of lose the physical house.
Yeah, totally agree. Right. So all these things are kind of increasing the defensibility and the resilience of any of these new forms of governance or network states or charter cities or, you know, seaports on land that you're making, and thereby making the industry competitive, right? So that's the whole goal. If you reduce the barriers to switch for people to change a jurisdiction, then, you know, the entities, the governance service providers are forced to provide you with a better service and compete for you. And this way they improve and, you know, do less harm in the process, or in the end, hopefully.
Severin, are you still there?
Daniel, yes, I am.
Are there any other questions?
So maybe because we have, at least from the calendar invite, actually blocked some more time. I think this was a very nice intro. Now we had like both of these presentation. Maybe we open up the floor now to go maybe a little bit more in a general discussion around technologies, infrastructure needed, right? I mean, we already were talking about different strategies and approaches to achieve somewhat of the same goals. And so maybe we just open the floor. Anybody who has either a comment or an idea or a question to the audience regarding infrastructure technology needed wants to raise that and throw this out there.
Nice. Well, as Daniel told before,
I can go because I feel greatly inspired, because both of you are at the forefront of innovation. That Prospera in Honduras, it is like a lighthouse. This is probably one of the only notable examples right now. Everyone uses Prospera as an example.
Yes. So there.
Continue, Mati. You are speaking and he's just jumping.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, Prospera is the 0 to 1, which is great. I mean, it, you know, does face the risk that you mentioned, right? So it has political pressure by the Honduran government. So there is a single point of failure, as you correctly mentioned. But there's also a chance that it succeeds, and it's actually very good, right? Because Prospera has acquired rights. So many people thought like a year ago, when the government did vote for a repeal of the law, hey, you know, Honduras is done, but it isn't, right? So Honduras still has the ZA law. Congress needs to do a second repeal of the law, which they might do. I estimate the chance at about 50% that they do that. But that means there's a very good chance it continues. And even if they repeal the ZA laws, Prospera and Ciudad Morazan have acquired rights. So they have a legal stability guarantee of 50 years. So the engineers of the ZA law were extremely forward thinking, right? So Honduras is really unprecedented in terms of the legal structure for creating these special zones. And, you know, we have a very good chance, I think the greatest chance in the present, to really push the boundaries the furthest possible in Honduras. And I really sincerely believe we can do it in Honduras. And I'm fighting very hard for that because I've just made very, very good friends there. And there's been people working here for like tens of years to make it happen in Honduras. Like it's very largely carried by Hondurans. It's a homegrown innovation. One of my good friends, Jorge Colindres, will hopefully be remembered as the founding father of modern Honduras. He's one of the key legal innovators, and he's a very young man, 29 years old. And he's just, that's his life and his passion. And it's just infectious when you're there. So that's why I have so much skin in the game and decided to relocate there, even though, you know, that's something that not everyone would do considering the political climate right now. But I would highly encourage you to check it out. And we have a very, very good chance that will work. It's of course not guaranteed. It's a Shackleton's journey, right? So there is a risk, but there's also a very, very high reward.
Regarding infrastructure, the simple thing is housing. You know, we have I think we have the ability to build much cheaper houses than are currently out there, but you know, because all the homeowners want their houses to go up in value, if you create abundance in the housing market, then all the homeowners are, oh no, I'm losing all my wealth because, you know, everyone else is getting houses for cheap, so my house isn't worth so much. So for all that reason, governments pass all these laws that basically forbid people from building houses. I mean, the reason we have homelessness is because the government in most countries forbids people from building houses, except at a very, very slow glacial rate. So it's not so much the infrastructure in terms of technology that's a problem. It's the permission to roll out existing technologies that we already know exist that can provide people with shelter, but they're just incredibly, but the states don't let people roll them out. And, you know, so I guess the question is, how do we get countries to give planning permission to build you know, cheap shelters on a large scale in new zones, and you know, which countries are most promising in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, I think Prospera and also Ciudad Morazan, the other charter city on Honduras, are interesting examples. I mean, Prospera simply has like a super free market approach. So they're saying, hey, we can't regulate housing. We're not like zoning the land, right? So we're creating a competitive market for real estate and for land, right? And we're creating kind of an insurance industry and private arbitration on top, right? So it's not the government settling these disputes, and you can't like lobby for regulations with the government and that can force everyone to abide by these regulations. Is that there's kind of a regulatory pluralism instead, right? Where you can propose your own regulations, how you as a business are regulated. So I think that's a super interesting and very sophisticated approach. It has yet to be proven, of course, right? So Prospera doesn't yet have a competitive insurance industry. It's just too small for that, right? So it has to be proven, but I think it could be the absolute winning proposition that can be applied in any other jurisdiction. Now compare that with Ciudad Morazan. I just did a 3-hour-long episode with them, which is super, super fascinating and interesting. They have a very different development model, right? So they're saying, hey, we're the sole provider of the land and the real estate. We're basically like a shopping mall, right? So you can't like own land or real estate, you have to rent it. Everything else is super free market, right? So we're not doing like any government services, healthcare, or, education, schooling, or whatever. We're just sort of the platform, like a shopping mall, and the rest you build on top yourself, right? So it's a completely free market, but in land and real estate, which sort of goes back to George's discussions and sort of communitarian anarchism of Spencer Heath and Spencer Heath McAllen. So that's super interesting, right? So they're right now building housing like for Honduran families for 18K, right? And it holds a family. Like I lived in one for 2 weeks. And it's very nice and it has everything that it needs, right? So this way they can rent it out for like $120 a month, which is like insane. And then they're able to provide security services in one of the most dangerous parts of the country, which by extension is one of the most dangerous parts in the world, right? So that's just also a super interesting development model that could, you know, scale as well if you have many of these kind of charter zones.
I think Matthias had a question and got interrupted. You're muted, mate.
Estás muteado, Mati.
Yes, sorry. I'm here. Okay, I want to tell everybody about our project. It's about technology. We already made the MVP, already working in our co-working space. It's related about tokenize the key to open the building. And the most important part of this technology is that we empower the community. Well, Thomas is in our co-working space right now. He can show everybody how it works. The idea of the MVP is to prove that communities can build together the keys to open their own buildings, okay? And we made it. We can do it in Uruguay as a startup place. And please, Tommy, can you go to the? There's Tommy walking through
Yes.
the space.
I'm gonna take my cell phone. Sorry, I forget it on the table.
Okay. Our idea is to give the community the power to tokenize the keys, okay? And when you tokenize the key, you can use the key to open doors inside your buildings. In a co-working, you can go to a table or a meeting room or whatever you want. In a co-living space, you can go to your room or another space that you want to need. Our idea is to explore the share economy based on blockchain, okay? Behind the key, you have smart contracts, you have the ability to add value to that smart contract, coming from the individuals of the community, okay? When you see our project, the space it's nice, but the really value of our project is inside the keys, because all of the keys are totally different. That's why they are NFTs, because the NFTs have the ability to be unique. Well, Thomas now is showing you a piece of art related to one of the collective NFT projects. This project is related to plastic and the architecture, and well, there's a lot of. Tommy, can you explain more in detail about that project?
Yes, indeed. Well, this is a local girl that she just take trash from the beach, and she made this beautiful piece of art. It's kind of recycle the plastic taken out from the environment and put it into a piece of art. We support her with our collection NFT that we made for every artist that they want to digitalize their art. We try to help it, and she made a collection, and we put the benefit that you can get in the co-work with that NFT. So this is a shared economies that it's not only give me the money, I enter the co-work, it's support and local artists with a really nice project with nice impact, and you can enjoy our co-work. So it's all an environment that it's really good for all the artists and local people who want to get more visible, no?
Nice, nice. That's the idea, to prove that we can do better things together as a community, putting things in one place. As an example, we have a lot of projects like that project, and we are making the project more visible to the local community, and it's working now. We have a lot of people came to use this place and speaking about, well, this is the ground for making events, making reunions, whatever we want to use. And the people start to use these NFTs as the economy, as the way of promoting themselves to others about what they do, and it's working. And we want to help other places to adopt this same point of view, use blockchain as the new economy inside their communities, and give them the power of use the blockchain to real examples like open doors or unlock other physical things inside the buildings. So that's our contribution to this whole view. If we can use this in small places, what we can use this in other places too. Okay.
Very cool. I love it. That's in Uruguay?
Yes, that's in Uruguay.
Very cool co-working space. I'd love to visit sometime. I was wanting to check out the pharma zones in Uruguay as well, to see what's going on.
Okay, nice. We are from Argentina and Uruguay.
Sorry?
We are from Argentina and Uruguay. We have a lot of friends around this area. Now we are in Uruguay, starting this place, but we are working in Argentina too, with a lot of co-working spaces and co-livings to try our solution in their local buildings. So in the next month, we are going to expand these ideas to other places.
Very cool. Love it.
Yeah.
The two presentations were excellent. I'm just checking. Can you hear me loud and clear? Perfect.
Sure.
Sorry, I had some issues because I'm walking around the house and I've been to the garden. The garden is such a great experience. But my point is about the climate change and regeneration villages. I know that Gareth mentioned this during his talk. And for me, the circular economy and climate change adaptation is a big thing. And I agree with the Niklas point about the housing. Like in the UK, most of the wealth of people is tied to the housing. So there is so much regulation and no one wants to build new homes. However, when we look at from the holistic perspective of a climate change and the places that are not habitable to live, I'm actually anticipating that we will need to relocate entire nations. Nations such as Tuvalu, with the highest point 4 meters above the earth, or maybe nations like Bangladesh, that is in the river delta. They had the flooding since forever. Now it's even worse because the monsoons are more extreme. There is more ice melt from Himalayas. And I was actually thinking, can we buy some land from Kazakhstan And I mentioned Kazakhstan simply because they have loads of land. They have so much land that Russia put their Cosmodrome Baikonur because so much land. They were testing chemical weapons on the Aral Sea, but now it's actually no longer a sea because it evaporated. And they had the nuclear test site that is so large, there is no even a fence around this nuclear site. So my point is like a large scale ecosystem restoration and relocating 100 million of environmental refugees and doing some transnational land deal. This is of course big and badass idea, but you inspire me to think bigger. I can actually comment a little bit more about the Cosmodrome Baikonur because the Russia, they are building their new Cosmodrome Vostochny somewhere on Siberia. So Cosmodrome Baikonur might be available for sale. And when Elon Musk and SpaceX, when they are doing their, mission to Mars, this is United States only. They have an export on rocket technology because it's military. You cannot just export this technology to China or Russia. But if us, like a decentralized movement, will unite and come together, we can actually buy the Cosmodrome Baikonur from Kazakhstan or buy our own land. And basically, yeah, I see that both approaches are possible, starting at cloud first or doing some land deal. And I think that with the depth and the countries willing to acquire resources, Greece can accept to sell one of their islands. They have like 1,000 islands. Some of them are not utilized, not developed. And because they have a large depth, countries like Greece with depth can accept, okay, we'll just sell one of the islands. And again, it is a big idea, but you inspire me to think bigger. Thank you. By the way, I do not want to take too much of your time. I'm just seeing some of your body language that you are nodding your heads and giving me thumbs up. Seriously, this is a very interesting discussion. And I'm actually thinking about building a new world government because I'm working on the meta crisis. Meta crisis because it's not just the climate change, not just the food shortages, energy crisis, it's also nuclear proliferation, pandemics, mental health epidemics, distrust in media, distrust in politics. So the world is very ripe for the revolution. And yeah, we cannot just burn down the old system because we still need some governance structure. So the funny term for this is bend, not break. So we still need to do a gentle transition to a new system. And there are some ideas. I'm actually leading this movement. Okay, so let's assume that I come from the future because hypothetically, when you travel close to the speed of light, there is a different Newtonian physics. Like we are in the 3D, so we have our own perception of time. But hypothetically, in theory, if you travel close to the speed of light, there is a different perception of time. And I'm actually thinking that so far, no one disproved that I'm not a message from the future. Like I have access to a certain dimensions of energy and consciousness and visions that neither confirm nor deny that this could be from the future. Maybe I'm right now channeling the collective consciousness of various researchers, philosophers, time in the humanity directly connected to AI. So I'm actually thinking that it's not untrue. But maybe yes, maybe no, there is still some ambiguity. I just like being a little bit entertainer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think Mars, you also started one of the first network states, or like you designed at least the ID. Genesis, no, it was called. So I was Googling how should a Web3 ID look like, and I found you. And of course, what you are saying is true, this is something where it could easily be framed as being crazy or whatever, but speaking to the most powerful people in this world, they would all confirm what you just said. No.
Thank you.
But still, then you should also understand, don't go into any physical fights, you know. So I don't know if it works if you just buy some territory from Kazakhstan, because then Kazakhstan will get pressure from US or whatever. So you need to outsmart the people who rule this world. They think about around 4 corners, and we need to think around 5.
Thank you. I really appreciate this feedback. I posted the link to this network state genesis because the Balaji posted this blog early April, and soon after 420, like 10 days later, I put this vision because I was thinking exactly similar, and then he put it very nicely together. Then I had a discussion with a blockchain socialist about the bioregional commons, because I am faithful to the original vision of the Balaji, but then Balaji went on so many different tangents and he alienated some of the people. And I'm also realizing that sometimes we need to be very cautious how we communicate with Kazakhstan, because we can alienate loads of people. So in terms of media messaging and unifying narratives is very super important, because hey, Prospera is controversial. It is the very poverty country, but maybe we should say, look, here is the poverty here and here is wealth here. Which system do you choose? Maybe we should just roll with it, all the hate, because many people say it's inequality, it's exploitation, it's colonialism, you are consuming our resources. There is a big fucking backlash, but maybe we can just twist it. Okay, this is what you do, and here is our message. Look at the prosperity, look at these skyscrapers, look at these 2,000 jobs, look at all these kids who now go to school. So it's possible to twist the message.
It's interesting, just as a quick observation in between, that in a context of talking about technology and these kind of things, we don't talk about technology at all, which is not a critique, but an interesting observation, which maybe hints at that this is actually not so much about technology. I think there are some technological enablers involved, but it's an interesting observation of the discussion here.
Yes, because we are still in the phase where, you know, we are analyzing the actual problem and more people are joining. And some started before, like earlier, and others are joining now. That's why we still have the discussion going on, what's the actual problem. But when I sit down with really powerful people, we don't need to speak about the problem. Okay, we just speak about solutions. So that's why maybe we have this conversation. What is the actual problem? But yeah,
I think that's a good question in general, maybe for next time, like doing some problem analysis and framing this, because I feel like, again, like there's a lot of talk about solutions, possible approaches and strategy, but being very explicit about your perspective. I think there's something Niklas did very well, making explicit his perspective and his framework where he's coming from. And I think also Gareth to a good degree. And yeah, I think that will probably be a very productive conversation next time.
About the problems and solutions, I've just realized to have an app that is like a governance app, this fair share commons, the QR code that opens the co-working space and you see the issues to vote. I've just realized, let's think a little bit bigger, because this is my phone, and design of this phone did not change in like 15 years. We are still operating on Apple hardware and Apple App Store. Maybe we should have our own phones, our own operating system, our own culture, because at this point, I don't want to have an app for governance. My governance and my citizenship is my entire phone. And then these devices, they just consume, influence my way of thinking. I still think in like small squares. And yeah, entire operating system designed from scratch for citizenship and governance, and maybe even, entire new operating system integrated with AI and brain-computer interfaces. But that's Star Trek. I would say that the Apple is the biggest and Google biggest network state.
Okay, people, in my position individually, I just gonna leave this meeting. I appreciate all of you, your information, what you share with us, and I hope we're gonna create this world change and everything that I can make. I'm at your commands. Let's go, Coco. Thank you, Dago, and all the people here. Nice to meet you. Bye bye.
Bye, Tommy. I'm also gonna head out. It was fun. Thanks for inviting me.
Maybe you can take a photo before we go. Can everyone turn on the
Okay,
camera?
we do it for the
Yeah?
sake of history. Severin, do you take the picture?
Okay.
We can do that.
Prendan la cámara, vamos, Andy, todo.
Hi, hello, everyone.
A little bit late. Hello.
Very good, very nice. Nice to see you and meet you. I'm from Uruguay, Argentina too. I'm working with Thomas and Mati Wetfer, so it's nice to stay here and meet your face and your ideas.
Yeah.
So very nice and thank you.
It will happen what we do. The question is how smooth will be the transition. I witnessed this with the upcoming co-living industry, you know. It will happen. It's just how smooth we do it, definitely. Okay.
Let's go.
Awesome. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good one.
Yeah, folks.
Thanks, everyone. Great
Thank
stuff.
you. Bye bye.
Nice weekend.
Enjoy.
Catch you later.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye bye.